I like your shirt.
Oh, thanks so much.
Where'd you get it from?
I actually made it. Do you want me to show you how to make it?
I think so.
Let's go. You think so?
It's a 9 to 5. Ain't got no time for you and I.
Finally made it to the studio. So I made this top a few months ago, wore it all throughout Europe, absolutely loved it, and it is inspired from the Ganni, however you say that style top. And today I wanted to take you through the process of bringing it to life, even showing you ways that you can customize it, say if you want different sleeve lengths, body lengths, or just to match your style. Because I've made this long sleeve version, I myself am going to make a white short sleeve version. I'll talk you through the areas that you can customize it to suit your preferences as well. So if you want to follow along and bring a top like this to life, this is what you'll need. We're going to be following a self-drafting method, so grab a top that you would like to reference the fit of. I have just got an oversized t-shirt. That's what we'll be basing the bodice section of. As this is a loose fitting top, ideally size up, or we can just add some extra seam allowance where need be to get that looser fit. Now you can either directly trace around this top onto your fabric, or you can grab some extra paper and actually create a pattern. The benefit of this means that you can then in the future go back and reference this and can reuse it again and again to create other pieces. For the fabric, I would recommend something nice and lightweight. This one is a pure linen and I've loved how flowy and soft it is, whereas the top that I'm going to be creating today is from an old cotton top sheet. We haven't really used it that much, so I thought it could be turned into a top. Again, cotton is just nice and lightweight, breathable, goes across all the seasons. Personally, I like to lean towards natural fibers. That's why I've gone for linen and cotton. Otherwise, just try and stick to a non-stretch material where possible. I'll also place the recommended amounts of fabric per size in the description box of this video. So if you want to follow along, check that out. So the whole style of this top is this oversized balloon style sleeve. And the way that we finish the bottom of the sleeves is by elasticizing it and creating a gathered effect. So we'll need some elastic for the bottom of the sleeves. I'd recommend going no wider than about 1 centimeter or 1/4 of an inch. And then to figure out how much you'll need, just wrap it around the finer point of your sleeve and make sure you have enough for both sleeves. Obviously this longer sleeve finished at my wrist, whereas the one today is going to be going around my upper arm area. So I'll make sure that I have enough to go around, plus about 2 inches of seam allowance. Once we've got those specific things for this top, we'll then just need the basic sewing essentials like some pins, fabric scissors, some fabric chalk, a measuring tape, some matching thread to go with our material. Keep in mind if you are creating a paper pattern, you'll also need some paper scissors and then also a pencil to trace around. And then our trusty old sewing machine. Let's get into making it. Now it's time to trace out our pattern pieces. So to get the main top panels, we will grab our reference top, fold it in half so that the front sides and good sides are facing outwards. And then once it's laid down onto our paper, we can begin folding areas away that we don't need to trace around. So that includes folding the sleeve away, as that will reveal the shape of the sleeve hole. And then we'll fold the bottom of the top up into the point where it meets the length that we want it to be. For me, I grabbed my measuring tape and started at the top of my shoulder, measured down to roughly about my waist area. And for me that ended up being about 17 inches. I then grab my measuring tape and lay it down on my top and fold the bottom up to this point. Now once I have the top all looking good, I can begin tracing around it, keeping in mind that I need to add some seam allowance to certain areas to get it to the ideal fit. No matter what your fit is, add 1 inch to the center seam, as that will allow a double folded hem to this area. And if you're like me and you would like it to be a little bit more oversized, I would recommend adding 1 inch to the side seam. Whereas if you're happy with the fit of your current top, just add 1/2 inch of seam allowance and leave it as is. Then for every other edge, we'll just add 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter of seam allowance. Keep in mind if you want to adjust the fit at this point, this is a great time to do that. For me, I kind of like to make the sleeve holes a little bit wider just so it feels a little bit more flowy and loose when you wear it. So I just traced down a little bit lower for my sleeve area, and then I was pretty much happy with every other area. Also keep in mind that the neckline of the front and the back is different, so I don't have to cut out multiple pieces. I ended up tracing the front and the back neckline on this same piece of paper, and I'll just remember when it comes time to tracing around it on the actual fabric that the higher one is the back and the lower one is the front. So once I'm happy with how that is all looking, I will then grab my paper scissors and cut out this panel. Next, we'll focus on cutting out the strap pieces. Now this comes down to your preference of how dramatic you would like the bow to be. This one that I'm wearing at the moment, I did it quite a bit longer, so I think I did about 20 inches long. It allows quite a bit of a dangling effect of the bow. For this next top, I'm going to make it a little bit more subtle, and I've cut out my piece at 15 inches. Keep in mind, I will probably lose about 1 to 2 inches just, of seam allowance and joining it onto the top. So if you have a particular length that you would like it to be, make sure to add 2 inches. And then for the width of it, whatever final width you would like it to be, double that and then add 1 inch of seam allowance. So my strap ends up being 1/2 inch wide. Obviously double that to 1 inch, add another inch, and that means my cutting width is going to be 2 inches. So to figure out the dimensions of the ruffle that we'll be adding on, measure the bottom of the top panel that we've just cut out, times that by 4, and that will end up being the full measurement of the bottom of the top that we're going to be adding this ruffle onto. Now again, this comes down to personal preference, how gathered you would like it to be. I'm personally going to times this measurement by 2 because I want the ruffled effect to be quite dramatic. Otherwise, if you're working with limited material or you don't want it as gathered, you can just times this by 1.5. So that's going to be the length of the ruffled section. Then the height of it is going to be how low it will come down. I would suggest measuring from your waist area or where the top is going to be finishing down to the point where you want this ruffle to sit. I want mine to be 6 inches as the final height, and I will end up adding 2 inches to this, so that is enough for a bottom folded hem as well as some seam allowance. So whatever you want the final height of your ruffle section to be, make sure to add 2 inches to that. Personally, I find this is going to be quite a long piece, so I'm not actually going to cut out a pattern piece for it. It'll just be much easier once I get to the fabric stage just to trace it out, as it's one long rectangle. So keep that in mind. You'll write that on a piece of paper so you can come back to reference those measurements. And then the last thing we need to figure out is our sleeve dimensions. So grab your measuring tape and measure from the top of your shoulder where you would like the sleeve to finish. If you would like it to be your wrist, obviously just extend the measuring tape all the way down. I thought it would look really nice sitting just above my elbow, and for me that ends up being 12 inches. So if I want that to be my final length that you look at, I need to keep in mind that we are going to be adding an elastic section at the bottom as well as ruffling the top of the sleeve and joining that onto the top. So all up, I'm going to be adding 3 inches to that measurement. So the length of the sleeve that I'll be cutting out will be 15 inches. As for the height of the sleeve, again, you're going to get sick of me saying this, but this comes down to your personal preference. For this top, I just left the top of the sleeve as its regular fitting size, and then the balloon effect comes in place with it being a continuous size all the way down to the wrist, and the elastic just gathers it in to fit nice and snug there. Whereas for the top that I'm going to be creating today, you've probably got the theme, I want everything to be quite dramatic, so I want it to be gathered up here as well as down there. So when I go to cut out the shape of the sleeve, I'll probably add about 2 inches to the height on top, and that means when I gather it down, it will just add a bit more of material so it has that extra balloon size look. To do this, we just trace around the armhole shape of our initial pattern, adding about 1 inch of seam allowance on the bottom section where you curve below the armhole, and like I mentioned, figure out if you want to add 2 inches above to give it more of a gathered effect here, or just leave it at the same height. Then this is where the length of your sleeve will come in handy as well. Figure out how long you would like it to be. Mine will be 15 inches for this shorter sleeve, so I just continue with the same tunnel width all the way down to the 15 inches, and that is how I create my sleeve pattern. So if you did want to change how gathered it would be, the straighter you do it, the more there will be here to gather up, so therefore it will be more dramatic. Or if you want it to be less gathered, you can angle it upwards and have less area here to gather. I think on a longer sleeve, that's probably a good thing to slightly angle it up, whereas for this shorter sleeve, we're going big. Because our shoulder is curved, the top of the sleeve ends up getting lifted a little bit. I'm going to experiment a little detail on this sleeve, and you can choose whether you like how it looks or whether you just want to keep it nice and straight. If you're doing a long sleeve, I reckon straight is perfectly fine because it tends to just even up by the time it gets out there. Whereas short, it seems to be a bit more obvious that the lengths are a little bit off. So when it comes to my pattern, I'm going to find the bottom of my sleeve, so that's where we curved that extra bit down, and then find the end of the sleeve and angle in, let's go about 2 inches. So I'll mark in 2 inches from that bottom corner and then angle up to the top, and we'll see how that goes when it cuts out. Otherwise, if I don't end up liking how it looks, then ignore this and I'll let you know. And now that means I should have all of my measurements and pattern pieces ready to go. Let's use these to cut out the fabric. So I'm going to focus on cutting out the back piece first. Also, let's just ignore the fact that this sheet needs ironing because I'm not ironing a like 3-meter sheet. As the process mentions, we cut it on the fold. So this edge, which is folded, ends up aligning with the straight center of the pattern. So try and fold it over so you have enough space where the pattern can fit easily on here. And because we're cutting out the back piece on the fold, I will then trace around the back neck, which is the higher piece, so that's easy to leave as now. And we're just going to go for it. You can either trace around it and then remove the pattern piece and follow the chalk line, otherwise you can just do what I'm going to do and just cut around the panel. So now when I remove the pattern piece, I unfold this, and that is the one back panel piece. So I'll pop that aside, ready for the assembling phase. And now we'll cut out the 2 front pieces. For the 2 front pieces, I'm going to cut out one of these and then use that as a template to cut out the second one, making sure that when I do that process, I cut them out mirrored, so that means good sides facing. So then when they unfold, both of the good sides are facing outwards and they're ready to assemble facing all the ways that we want to. Now this is the section where we need to keep in mind to cut the lower neckline for the front section. It could be a bit hard to fold it back as is. Find if you grab your paper scissors and just trim, that will be the new neckline. So now that we've cut out that first piece, we'll just flip it over so it is a mirrored of the first. Next up, it's nice and easy. I'm just going to cut out 6 of the strap panels. We'll be doing the on the fold method again to create the sleeves. Fold it to match the height of the sleeve panel that we've got cut out. Might take a little bit of adjusting. Perfect. The section that lines up with the folded edge is the top of the sleeve. So there's the curve, that's the bottom, and this top edge is on that folded edge. And then I'll just cut out this first piece on the fold and repeat that for the second sleeve. My bottom of my panel is 12 inches or 30 centimeters, and then timesing that by 4 equals my full circumference of the final top, which is 48 inches or 1.2 meters. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I want to double that because I want a really gathered effect down there. So I will need 2.4 meters in length. I benefit here because I am using quite a large sheet, so I probably will be able to cut out 1 continuous panel. Whereas if I was just using some fabric off the roll or thrifted stuff that I didn't have 1 continuous amount, you can just cut multiple panels and then join them together to equal the full length. Keep that in mind. Don't stress if you can't do it all in one go. We've got some length to cover, and this table ain't big enough. See, this is a scenario where I'll probably just cut it wider than what I need, and then when I sew, it'll even out, because she's probably going to be very wonky. I've officially cut out all the panels ready to start assembling, and it's nearing the afternoon, and I feel like I'd rather come back tomorrow and have a full day of not having to rush through it. So see you tomorrow. For the first step of sewing, I'm going to focus on joining the front and back panels. So I've got my back panel laying down with the good side facing up. I'll then grab my 2 front panels, make sure that the good sides are facing down, match it to its side and top edge, and do the same on the other side, lay that. And then I'll just sew along the shoulder edges and down the side edges. I've just switched my thread over to a white to match the fabric, and then now I'm going to jump into sewing. Obviously, if you feel like pinning any of these areas in place that don't move around, that is perfectly fine. Make sure you just do that before you jump on the machine. And then I'm going to make sure to sew with about a 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch seam allowance along these 2 edges. Happy sewing. I like to do one try on at this point just to make sure everything is sitting how I want it to. Whereas like if the armholes were tight, I could adjust it now, or if the fit needs to change, I can also do that here now. Just keep in mind when you are trying stuff on that you're probably going to lose a little bit here and there where the seam allowance will be getting taken away. So that will sit nice. So once I take that in up there, this is going to get double folded in the center. So we'll lose quite a bit, which will help pull it in a bit more. Again, I'll lose a bit there and it will sit where I want it to. Could even make it a little bit shorter here. I think the other one that I made, the ruffle sits quite low, which is kind of cute, but you've really got to be a bit more mindful about it. Whereas if I feel like if it sits up higher, it might suit my style a bit better, but I feel like that could be good actually. And then the ruffle will be there. Cool. It looks very boxy, but I feel like the vision is there and it's going to come together how I want it to. So let's add the sleeves on. I did find when I tried it on that the front was sitting a little bit boxier than I wanted it to. See how the front and the back are matching at the moment? An easy way to fix this is if you just bring the front piece out a little bit more exposing, and you can pre-draw this out as well if you find that easier, but I'm only taking about 1/2 inch at the widest point and then just matching the curve back at this bottom bit. So then when it's laying flat, you can see the front just comes in a little bit more than the back. A little difference, but it could make it sit a little bit nicer. Next up, we're going to prepare the sleeves and then attach them on. So we'll start by focusing on the curved edge, which is what we'll be joining onto the top. Mine actually looks quite straight, so you might find that yours is a little bit curvier than mine, but keeping in mind that it is longer than normal because we added that extra length so it can gather in. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing now. So switch your machine to a longer stitch. I did mine to the max setting, which is a size 4, and then leave it on a regular straight stitch. We'll then begin at the very end of this area and just follow as close as we can to this edge until we reach the other side. I tried to aim for around 1/2 centimeter or 1/4 inch off that edge. The closer to the edge, the better, because it just means that we'll get lost in the seam allowance later on and we won't lose too much length. One key point to this step is we do not backstitch because we want the thread to be loose so that we can then pull it and gather it up. But I'll talk you through that step next. So jump on your machine and sew 1 one line entirely across this armhole length. It's so hard to resist doing the back stitch. It's like muscle memory going to do the back stitch at the beginning and the end. So just slow down and make sure that you don't do that, because it's not the end of the world, but it just will help. I've got my top with the good sides all facing out, and now I'm going to lay down my sleeve with the good sides facing out, matching it to that edge. So pretty much what we're looking at is what it will all end up facing outwards at the finish. I find it easy just to lay them side by side so you can figure out how much you need to pull along the thread and gather it up so it matches the height of the armhole that we'll be adding it onto. I've got the two threads of the underside and the top side. Grab a hold of one of them and begin to just pull the fabric over the top of it. Just make sure to be gentle. If you are too aggressive with it, it might end up snapping the thread, and that just means you'll probably need to sew a new line. So gently just pull it along. I'm going to push majority of this gathering to the top of the sleeve, as I feel like that's where I want the boldness and puffiness of it, and I'm happy for the bottom of the sleeve to be ungathered, because then it just won't be bunched up under there. So as I do this, I'm just kind of pulling the fabric along the thread, pushing it up to that top area. It might be easy to do one side and then start on the other side so that it evens it out, and do it to the point where it roughly looks like it'll match the height of the armhole, making sure that you've got at least a tiny bit of seam allowance at the bottom. Keep in mind, worst comes to worst, because it is gathered, we can adjust it if we need to make more room. I do find because this material is a little bit stiffer, it's actually holding the gather really nicely. Yeah, just keep that in mind when you are fabric shopping. If something's too flowy, it might not hold it as nicely, but it just comes down to personal preference. I feel like I like how this is turning out. I've gathered up those areas to the point where I feel like it is now matching the armhole with that little bit of extra seam allowance down the bottom. Now I'm going to pin it in place. Shock horror, she's actually using some pins. From here, I'm going to flip the sleeve so it is now sitting on top of the garment. Unfold the sleeve and matching the seam of the top at the shoulder section to the center of this sleeve that we've just unfolded. That's going to be my starting point, so I can then work from there. Again, making sure the good sides of the sleeve should be facing the good sides of the top, as that's how we want it to be sewn. So then when we unfold it, all the good sides are facing outwards. First pin in place, and then I just continue down the front side. You might find that because they are curved areas and they are kind of curving away from each other, you need to adjust as you go. That's perfectly fine. Just do that, match it up, get to the bottom, flip it around, and then do the back side as well. And then we can sew it in place. It looks like I've gathered it to a point where it sits perfectly where they meet, but I still feel like I need a little bit of overhang. So what I'm going to do is just unpin that bit. This last bit of gathering, I'll just pull it back down, so then it adds a little bit of extra length to the end. And that should be enough, so I have about 1 centimeter or half an inch of seam allowance to join the bottom edges. Perfect. See how it goes beyond by that little bit now? When it gets to the bottom seam, that means that'll overhang and be the bottom section where I join the bottom of the sleeves. Currently still got my machine set to a longer stitch, so now I'm going to go back to just a regular, roughly around a 2 length on my machine. And now I'm going to start at the bottom seam of the top, so entirely around the sleeve, and meet back to where I started. I find for an armhole, because it is quite a tight space, I like to take this section off and just tuck the bottom of the sleeve that I'm not sewing underneath, and then focus on the top there. So this is the side seam that leads up to the bottom of the armhole. That's where I'll be starting. Make sure when you start sewing this sleeve section that you've got a bit of a tail end so you can join it up, and then we just start sewing around. We want to sew with enough seam allowance so that this line is getting hidden within there. I find if you sew at about 1 centimeter of seam allowance or half an inch, that should be plenty good if we did sew as close as we could to the sideline. There's a lot of material as you go around this area, so just make sure that you take it nice and slow. Make sure that everything is lined up how you want it to look, that the bottom top layer is sitting nice and flat, and then obviously the gathered section on top of it is sitting how you want it to, and then it should all work out. If you have an overlocking machine, you might want to overlock the seams at each of these steps just so they're nice and clean and looking nice. I just got given a second-hand overlocking machine, so I think I'm going to deal with that at the end. Sometimes it's just easy just to go back at the end and clean up all the edges, whereas some people like to do it as you go, so keep that in mind. Also, if you don't have an overlocker or a serger or whatever you call it, you can just switch your machine to a zigzag stitch and clean the edges that way. That's what I've done for many years, and it holds up. Now that the sleeve is all attached, I'm going to close up the under seam of the sleeve. We're going to fold this whole garment inside out. That way all the good sides of the materials are facing, and I'll just focus on this underarm section, start sewing at the bottom of the armhole out to the end of the sleeve, and that will close that all up. Nice and easy. Sometimes with the whole gathering method, you might find that you have a little bit more seam allowance under the armhole than you intended to. So I've just sewn from there out towards as close as I can to the edge. Therefore, I will just cut off any seam allowance down here and keep it to as close to the sewing line as possible. Ooh, we successfully have one sleeve attached. I just wanted to try it on quickly just to make sure. Remember how I cut on the angle of the bottom of the sleeve to test out the theory if it would sit nicer? I feel like it does. It feels like it's sitting a little bit straighter. Then when I add the elastic section down the bottom, it should sit nice and exactly how I want it to. Yay! Flip the sleeve, back so it's inside out. I'm going to do one single fold on this raw edge of the end of the sleeve, and it's going to be about 1 centimeter. Sew that entirely in place, and then we'll do a second fold, and that's where we'll add the elastic into. So for now, create the one fold of about 1 centimeter and sew it in place. And now we need to create a second fold, which is large enough for the elastic to fit in. So it might be a good time to grab your elastic, create the second fold, and just lay the elastic on top to make sure that there is enough space for that to fit in there, plus some seam allowance. So this is about 1 centimeter or just under half an inch. I will probably create one fold of roughly 2 centimeters. Essentially, whatever this is, plus about half an inch or 1 centimeter of seam allowance. You can either hold your elastic in place and figure that out, or measure it out if you know the exact measurement. It's time to sew entirely around this area, securing this fold in place. And we just need to make sure that we stop about 1.5 inches, almost 3 centimeters from where we started. And that will just give us a little hole that we can access the elastic through. I like to start and end at around the bottom seam, the underarm area, because it will just get nice and hidden, and it will look like a nice continuous line up the top. So to figure out how much elastic, I'm going to wrap it around where my sleeve is going to finish. I'm not going to pull it tight because personally I want it to feel nice and loose around there. So it's just sitting as is, and then like I mentioned, I'll have about 1 to 2 inch tail. What's mine? Mine's probably in the middle, about 1.5 inches or 3 centimeters tail overlapping. So then I will trim it at that point, and I can just use that as a reference to then cut the second one. So these are the 2 elastic lengths that I'll add to the bottom of my sleeves. Attach a safety pin to the end of the elastic. That's what will then be entering in the hole that we left open. You can utilize the safety pin and bunch up the fabric over it, pull it across, and just continue that process until you reach back to where we started. Maybe keep a hold of the tail end of the elastic because we don't want that to get pulled in and then get lost. It's probably ideal to try and not twist the elastic throughout there, as it will look nicer at the end and just feel more comfortable on your arm when you wear it if it's nice and flat. So now it's popped out the other end. I can then unclasp the safety pin, and then these 2 tail ends that are hanging out, we will then overlap by the amount that we added. For me, that was about 1.5 inches, making sure that it remains flat and untwisted. And then we'll just zigzag across there, securing that in place. If it helps at all, it might be handy just to like fully pull it so that it's very gathered on the sleeve and you've got enough of the elastic hanging out, so therefore you have room to overlap it and sit it on the sewing machine. And then the very final step of the sleeve is we'll just pull that now so that it hides the elastic entirely within that folded area that we created. Gorgeous. Remember to switch our machine back to a regular stitch, so a straight stitch, about 2.5. We'll just go back and close up that hole that we left open, trying to keep in line with the existing sewing line of that hemmed edge. Now that this one sleeve is all done, we'll just repeat that exact process for the second sleeve. If you need a reminder of how to do that, obviously just go back and rewatch this section. For now, we're going to be jumping into the next step. It's officially reveal time to see how these sleeves have turned out. Puppy sleeve goodness! Next, we're going to finish up the neckline and the center front. Let's go. I flipped the garment inside out, and now I'm going to focus on the back center neck area and just begin the process of creating a double folded hem around this whole neckline area. Again, like the sleeves, it is a curved area, so you might just need to focus on it bit by bit, adjust it, and then take it nice and slow as you sew it in place. I find as well with the neck area, it's easy just to do it as small as possible. So each fold is going to be about just under 1 centimeter, whatever that is, almost just under half an inch. For each fold, I just find it much easier to create smaller folds and work with the curved line. I find sometimes if you lay out the neck so it's looking like this, it helps a little bit with getting all the folds right. I pinned around the shoulder seams, the center neck, and then the front sections. I feel like they're just some nice key points that will help guide me when I'm coming up to that and making sure that I'm doing the fold right. It always looks messier when we're at this stage because the fabric's not used to folding this way, so it's just adjusting. Give it some time to get used to its new personality. I'll start at the front neckline and then work my way around. I feel like coming over the shoulder edge is always my least favorite bit. All the fabric just wants to go in different directions. As long as the bit where your needle is nice and flat, and you continue lining up the next bit, it should all work out. Famous last words. Not gonna lie, I feel like I nailed that. She is even. So I'm keeping it inside out, And now I'm going to focus on that center section and just going to do a double folded hem. This one I'm going to make a little bit larger than the neckline. So I'll probably do 2 folds and each of them being about 1 centimeter or half an inch each. I'm actually going to fold this and then pin it in place and do one last try on just to make sure that I'm happy with the fit, because this is where I could make adjustments if need be. Say if I wanted it to be looser, I could reduce the size of these folds, or if I want it to be tighter, I would then increase the fold, but just keeping in mind that it needs to go with the flow and fit of the neckline. I feel like that final fold has really helped it sit much nicer. Final fit, it'll end up sitting where it's just about touching, and then the bows will sit on top of that. So I feel like this is exactly what I envisioned. I'm sewing down the entire folded section that we've just created, about 1 centimeter off the edge from the top to the bottom. Same as we're focusing on the center front, let's just finish off the straps, and then the ruffle can be the finale. We're going to prepare the straps before we join them on. So lay them down with the good sides facing up, fold them in half lengthways, and then I'm going to sew across the short side, starting from the folded edge, sewing towards the raw edge, stopping about 1 centimeter, half an inch from that edge, and then sewing it down the entire length to the bottom, and then we'll leave the other short edge opened, so don't sew across there. And then we'll just do that and repeat it for all 6 straps. I finished sewing all 6 of the straps. If you find that you have an excessive amount of seam allowance, I'd recommend trimming it off just because it will make it look nicer once we fold it good sides outwards. And then grab something long and thin and pointy that will help push this out. I've just got a clean paintbrush. Place the end of the brush up to the closed end of the strap, open up the seam allowance and kind of pop it in that little area. Move the fabric around so it opens up a little, and then just begin. I've just got the brush up against me as well. I find that's easier, so you can have it on a surface or in your hand up against something, and then just give a bit of a gap in the strap, and then there'll be one point where you can kind of start pushing it, and then you can just grab the paintbrush and maybe, you know, as best as possible, be nice and gentle because it can break the seam or the fabric. Before you pull it fully out, grab the brush or whatever you're using to push the tips out so it makes those edges nice and crisp, and then you can just grab the rest and pull it out like so. And there's your strap all good sides facing out. Now just repeat that 6 times. Now there's 2 ways that we can finish these straps before we attach them onto the top. Again, comes down to personal preference and the aesthetic and vibe that you like. You can either just iron these flat, leave them as is, and then attach them like that, or you can go around and add a top stitch. So again, maybe iron them flat, get all the edges nice and crisp and even, and then sew up as close as you can to the edge of the full length across the top and then down the other length side, and that will just help keep it nice and flat if you don't like your straps to be puffy. And obviously once you wash them, they'll probably end up puffy like this. I think on my other ones I just left them as is. I'm personally just going to leave them as is. Do what you want to. And now we'll start joining them on. I'm going to lay these straps down so majority of them are sitting on the garment and away from the center section. These are my recommended placements. I would put the top one as close as you can to the top because we want that to be nice and snug up there. This one I would recommend probably in line with the armpit area, just because that will then equal generally your bust area, and I would like a tie there so it's not gaping open there. That for me ends up being center pretty much on my top. And then the last one I would put about 2 centimeters or 1 inch from the bottom. So we'll space them out just so we know their placement. Just for a nice little touch and extra thought, it's worthwhile putting the one seam facing one direction for all of them. I'm gonna have them all facing downwards. Again, not the end of the world, but it's just a detail that I feel like helps it look nice and polished. So now they're all facing downwards. The raw edge is also sitting up against the center area. And then for the actual final placement, we're going to offset them from the center by 2 centimeters, and then we'll do 1 sewing line to begin with to attach it in place, and that will be 1 centimeter from the raw edge of the strap. So we'll do that, and then I'll show you the final way of sewing it in place. For this first line, I'm going to switch the stitch to a smaller length. So as I've just put my length just under 2 on my machine, I'll remove my pin, which was placed where I'm going to sew, and sew a line across my strap onto the front panel of the top. Straps can be added in many different ways. Normally I would probably tuck them underneath and make them a bit more hidden, but I noticed in the Ganni style tops they have them sitting on the top, and because the bows also meet in the middle, I feel like it's just a nice final aesthetic detail. So if you have another preferred way of adding these straps in place and hiding them more, that's perfectly fine as well. I'm just adding them as more of a feature element. So that first sewing line just helps keep it in place, and then this next sewing line will help hide that raw edge that sits in there and just give it a nice crisp clean finish and be an extra sewing line that secures it in place. If you do find that these raw edges are hanging out when you fold it over, you can also trim them back so they are as close to the sewing line as possible. I might trim out just a little bit, keep it less bulky as well. Just trimming the tail ends, those raw edges that are hanging out. So for this final sewing line, I'm going to now fold it over that sewing line that we just first created, and then I will do a rectangle around this whole area. So up this side edge as close to the edge, across the top as close to the edge, and then we'll turn the corner once we get in line with the existing sewing line. I think that will just look nice, and also it'll be nice having that bit of extra gap there, so when we tie the bow it can kind of twist around there, and then turn the corner and go across the bottom as close to the edge and finish where we started. When we sew up the edge where the fold is, you might find that it's quite thick because it's got that underlayer there. You might need to swivel the side handle and take it nice and slow. I've also made sure to switch the length of the stitch back to the normal, so for me that's about 2.5, and then we just go for it. Also, if you haven't turned a corner before, just swivel this side section and that will move the needle down into the fabric. Stop at that point, lift up the foot, and then swivel the fabric around the needle that is in it, and then put the foot back down and just continue across the line. There might be some sections like this where all of the garment is over one side, so you might need to work your way across and then pull the garment through. So again, just take it nice and slow. I just love a good half-day session in the studio. If I tried to smash this all out in one day, I'd probably just like hate it by the end of it, whereas like today I'm genuinely excited to finish it and wear it. So this is how the top is looking so far. Now it's time to add the final ruffled section on. We have 2 steps of preparation before we add this onto the top. The first one is hemming the 2 side edges, so the short ones, and then one of the long edges. I'm gonna do this all in one go, doing a double fold of about 1 centimeter or ½ inch for each of those folds, and then sewing it entirely around. For the second preparation step, we will then focus on gathering that raw edge that we left unhemmed. We just repeat the exact same steps as earlier, where we switch the length to a longer stitch, then make sure not to back stitch at the beginning or the end, and sew a line entirely across there, separate the 2 threads and begin gathering it up to the point where it matches the entire circumference of the bottom of the top that we'll be added onto. I feel like it's actually really fun, this being the final step, and once this is all done, I can start wearing the top. There's a lot of material here though, so this hem could take a while. As per usual, if you would like to pre-pin or pre-iron this in place, go ahead and do that. I'm just gonna fold and sew as I go. You can just do a double fold like this straight onto the corner. But I find sometimes that little overhang is there. So one way you can get about that is fold this corner in on the right angle, up to the point where like that tip is in line with the edge of that fold. And then when you go to do this fold, it should create a nice little corner like that. So from the front, it hopefully won't poke out. I will end up just pinning this in place, so I don't have to worry about it when I get to it. And then to turn the corner, just do the same process of swiveling the needle in place, lifting up the foot, and then turning the corner and continuing to sew a straight line. Continue the whole length until you reach the other end. Repeat that process and go back up the short side. Switching my machine to a longer length, not back stitching when I start or finish, and sewing along this whole raw line length. Again, keeping as close to this raw edge as possible so then we can hide it within the seams later. I'm going to do one last final measurement of the bottom of my top, so starting from the front center on one side, entirely around the back and to the front again, and seeing how long that is. And that's the final length that I want this bottom panel to be gathered up to. Like 46.5 inches. I've laid down my measuring tape so I can reference that, and then I will gather this to the point which for me was 46.5 inches. Again, the benefit of it being gathered means that I can adjust it once I add it on there, or as I'm adding it onto the bottom of the top, so I'll roughly get it to that point. I'm going to lay the top so the good sides are facing up. I need to just move everything around. Make sure that these straps are out of the way when we're attaching this. If you feel like you can't trust yourself, grab a pin and pin them towards the top, or get a clip or whatever you have handy. I do not trust myself, so I'm going to be pinning these to the top. Okay, that's out of the way. The sleeves are pushed up, the straps are pushed up. I've got the bottom of the shirt all laying out, so it's one continuous line. Good sides are facing up. I've gathered up the bottom panel. Now I'm going to lay this good sides facing down and align the raw edges and pin it all in place. So I'll pin one end, making sure that the center edge of the top and the edge of this panel is all nice and aligned. I'll do the other side as well. And then hopefully it should be pretty well aligned. If not, you can keep adjusting the gatheredness of it. I think I could probably gather this edge just a little bit in, literally like 1 inch, and then I think it's all looking good. Maybe it might be worthwhile to sew the first half, make sure everything is matching up for the end, because that would be a good point to either stretch it out further or gather it in further if need be and make it look nice and spread out, and then you can match it up and finish. This is genuinely the final sewing line. Obviously we can go through and do any last final cleanups, but the final assembling line. I've also just made sure to switch my machine back to a regular length and regular tension. Rightio, here we go. Where I start, I'm gonna make sure that the edges are nice and flush. Keeping in mind, as you're sewing this, we want to keep the sewing line of the gathered stitch on the seam outside. And again, just take it nice and slow, focus on what's coming up or what's under the needle, and then realign it for the next stage and just keep going. Dum, da, da, dum. Oh my gosh. That's everything I wanted. I still really want to make a collar, but I think I'm going to make it detachable so it just sits on top, so therefore I can wear it like this or with a collar. Mario, is it time to like try it on and style it? Look how cute this is. I feel like this is exactly what I had in mind. It's a boxy, oversized, very exaggerated fit, and hopefully seeing me in the black top earlier, which had the long sleeves and was a little bit less gathered, and then seeing this one, which is very exaggerated, you can kind of figure out what you prefer and make decisions at each step based on the vision that you have. I was even thinking before, I didn't really mention, but obviously there's points that you can stop as well. You could make a tank top version of this. You could even not include the ruffle section and just leave it cropped there. So keep that in mind if you want to personalize it and stop at certain points. I'm so excited to style this. I feel like I could like wear it with some cute shorts like this, wear some skirts, pants, even layer it with like a little vest and have the puffy sleeves hanging out. The options are endless. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching this come to life. I hope it all made sense. Let me know below if you have any questions. And if you do happen to bring this to life yourself, make sure you tag me at the Essentials Club or DM me your outcome. I always love seeing your creations based off my tutorials. Genuinely makes my day. But yeah, I hope you have a lovely day wherever you are. I'll see you guys in the upcoming videos. Time to take this top out into the wild.